much delay to all. I'm Sakina Bhatt and welcome to our very first episode of In Conversation with Tibet TV. Today we have a very special person, a man who was initially a scientist but then decided to forsake his scientific career and instead practiced Tibetan Buddhism. He is a photographer, humanitarian and author, and also the French translator for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, besides being the board member of Mind and Life Institute. He is Matthieu Ricard. Thank you so much, Matthieu. It is lovely in every way to have you. Thank you so much for being a part of the show.
My pleasure.
Today we will be discussing about Mind and Life Dialogue, which is devoted to meetings and collaborative research between Buddhist scholars, scientists and mediators. So far, 33 dialogues have been held and His Holiness the Dalai Lama chaired the dialogues. So Matthieu, how did the idea of dialogue between Buddhism and science come up, and how did His Holiness the Dalai Lama become a part of this dialogue?
You see, many years ago, I think 30 years ago, when His Holiness came to India, then started to travel all over the world, a number of people became aware that since his youth, he had been extremely interested in science. And so in particular, at some point, he met with the late neuroscientist Francisco Varela.
Okay.
And they had an in-depth discussion about the brain, about all kinds of subjects. And another person called Adam Engel had the same perception that His Holiness was really keen to learn about science. So they got together and thought, why don't you create a structure, an institute, that will facilitate the dialogues between His Holiness and scientists, so that His Holiness could meet the best scientists, get the best teachers in quantum physics, neuroscience, psychology. So in the beginning, when they brought His Holiness together with scientists, it was a very, very small meeting, maybe with 10 people. And the main idea was to offer to His Holiness some knowledge about science, quantum physics and so forth. So then it turned out that it was not just His Holiness learning from the scientists, but the way he was interacting with scientists was also beneficial and mind-opening to the scientists. So the idea with time was to enlarge those dialogues, to choose a specific subject, to invite a number of scientists and observers, and to extend from one day to now, sometimes five days, as it was recently the case.
So initially it was just one day?
In the beginning they said very short, yes. Then in 2003, for the first time, Mind and Life decided to do a public meeting with much larger audience, and so it was hosted by the famous MIT Institute in Boston, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, on investigating the mind. And there were 1,000 scientists, several Nobel Prize, so it was the first exposure of these dialogues to a much larger public of over 1,000 people. Okay,
so how are the scientists selected to be a part of the dialogue?
A subject is being selected, like recently was education. Among the Mind and Life scientists and contemplative and Buddhist scholars, 2 or 3 people will become responsible for organizing one of those meetings. It may take up to 2 years, finding out who are the best scientists, philosophers, thinkers in that field throughout the world, extending them invitations, seeing if they can come, and of course being in correlation with His Holiness office to see a time where His Holiness will have 5 days to devote to that. So it takes a lot of time. And Mind and Life Institute is doing that very seriously. We usually have a pre-meeting 6 months before, with everyone comes, so it's a big organization, to rehearse and make sure that everything is smooth, that the flow goes well, that the scientists don't present things that are too complicated, that His Holiness cannot follow.
So the scientists are selected to be a part of the dialogue according to the subject?
Yes. Depending on the subject, we see who could be the most relevant person in the world to contribute to that debate.
Because you're saying that there is a lot of debate that is happening in the dialogue, so how do you come to a conclusion and who decides that?
But there's no such thing as a conclusion. It's bringing about the best of the present state of knowledge. That means not just like trying to teach the maximum information to young children, but also how to become a good human being, flourishing, how they become of good service, have a fulfilled life.
Okay, so does this Mind and Life dialogue apply only to Buddhism?
No. very often we had a representative from other traditions like Christians and others. And like recently with Tanya Singer, the neuroscientist, and myself, we were at the the organizer in a way with all the Mind and Life staff. So there was anthropologists and neuroscientists, but also there were representatives of all the major religions. So we had a rabbi from Netherlands, we have a French priest from France, we have a Muslim woman from Canada, we have someone representing the First People Nation from New Zealand, a Maori elder, and so forth. And myself, I was speaking in the name of Buddhism. And so likewise, the other contemplative traditions are often, of course, involved in our dialogue. Mostly, very often, yes, there's a kind of a stronger representation from the Buddhist side, because since those dialogue was initiated around His Holiness, so often they are Buddhist scholars, but it's not, of course, by no means exclusively focused on Buddhism.
So His Holiness the Dalai Lama is always present in this Mind and Life dialogue.
Yes, so the Mind and Life dialogues are in the presence of His Holiness, because it was meant to, offer him the best knowledge about particular aspect of science, so that he can use it to inspire others, to his teaching, to his public talks, to his vision of secular ethics. Now, but there are other endeavors of the Mind and Life Institute that happens without His Holiness. There is the Summer Institute. One happens in the US, one happens in Europe. Again, on a particular subject, could be education, for instance.
So the topics can repeat.
Yeah, this to encourage young scientists to come together, because sometimes they have interest for contemplative science, for meditation, but they feel a bit isolated in their own place. So that to create a community.
Okay, so Matthieu, you were a scientist and now you are a Buddhist monk. So according to you, how compatible are the two, Buddhism and science?
So often there is a kind of tension and conflict between religion and science, because some religions have some kind of cosmological dogma that clearly are not working well with science now. If you say the universe was created in 6 days, it's a bit of a problem 6,000 years ago. So His said, if science clearly contradicts one point of Buddhist knowledge, and it's obvious that it is the case, then we have to change, we have to give up that. Science is the pursuit of rigorous knowledge, discovering, explaining, predicting, and usually modern science is chiefly about explaining the physical laws and the life science or biology.
You have attended many Mind and Life dialogues so far. So what significance do you see in this? And what do you do with the research, the ideas, and the discussions that come out of this dialogue?
It's quite amazing to be part of something where you spend 5 days in the presence of His Holiness and benefit from what he says, and 5 days with some of the greatest scientists of our time, which how could I go around the world, try to knock at their door and meet them, and they all come together. And also the Mind and Life meeting in 2000 here in Dharamsala on destructive emotions. Halfway through the week, His Holiness said, well, that's all nice, what we discuss here in the little circle, but how can we really make a contribution to society? So then, that was said in the morning. At lunchtime, we sort of brainstormed. There was Paul Ekman, Richard Davidson, Francisco Varela, all these great scientists. And then it was, let's propose a research program. So that started a huge program of research, that beginning with a few labs, with like Francisco Varela, Richard Davidson, Paul Ekman, a few others. Then it spread to many other labs. And after that, usually the meetings are transcribed, a book is being published, those proceedings are put online, people can view them. I heard that we were just told that the meeting that just happened now on how to reimagining human flourishing based on education, that more than 2.5 million people have watched it throughout the week, even though we were just 200 people here, and personally not so much aware that so many people are watching us.
Okay, and there are many people who wants to read about it.
Well, all the scientists read about it. For instance, one of the first paper looking at the effect of compassion meditation in the brain, that had a very strong activation in some gamma frequency in the brain, was published by the PNAS, the Proceeding of the National Academy of Science of the United States. It was one of the most downloaded papers in that scientific magazine throughout the year.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama has always encouraged the Tibetan youth to learn Buddhist philosophies rather than just chanting prayers. So how can the younger generation embrace Buddhist philosophies and knowledge rather than just follow it blindly?
Well, that's up to them to follow this honest advice. No, ceremony don't make you enlightened. Ceremony will be an element to contribute to relieving suffering. But the real way to relieve suffering is analyze the root cause of suffering.
But why does His Holiness the Dalai Lama always focus on, always emphasize on the younger generation to learn Buddhist philosophies? Why is it so important?
Because if they don't, then it will be lost. And this is one of the richest philosophy in the world. If young people are not interested and just go around doing business or things like that, then that incredibly rich, 2,500 years Buddhist tradition and extraordinary tradition of inquiry, of analysis, of deep investigation of reality and of the mind was lost. This is one of the biggest loss we can think for humanity.
So, Matthieu, you have been described as the most happiest man.
Really?
So what does it require for an individual to embrace everlasting happiness?
So first of all, it's the biggest joke in the world, not the happiest man in the world. No, just think for a few minutes. How could, in his right mind, a scientist know what is the level of happiness of 7 billion human beings? Doesn't make sense. What happens? Simply, when we did this research, especially with Rishi Davidson, on compassion meditation, nothing to do with happiness, although altruistic love and compassion bring also happiness to you on top of the other. Because there was this very high activation in the brain, and I was one of the first one in time, but then there are many other real meditators came and had the same result. It's a result of the training, not that I'm a special guy. So scientific results say, okay, here's 20 people, they are quite different from untrained people, that's all. And they could show why in the brain.
So you actually had to do a brain test or something?
No, not for happiness, but in the course of the research on the meditation on compassion, altruistic love, we saw very strong activation to a level that was never described in neuroscience. But how many people did neuroscientists study? A few thousand maximum, not 7 billion. So a journalist from England, a journal called The Independent, made the first page cover story. Here we found the happiest person in the world. No, it doesn't make sense. But then I thought this will disappear within a few days. Then the next day, a newspaper in Bangkok, another one in Chile. So no control.
So how happy are you, Matthieu?
I'm quite happy, that's fine. But anyone can be the happiest woman or the happiest man in the world if you look for happiness in the right direction instead of turning our back to happiness. So there's a science of happiness, which is to get rid of hatred, of craving, of jealousy. So all this, which is part of the Buddhist path, is the key for happiness. So anyone can do it. Nothing special with me. I'm very, very grateful to my spiritual teacher, like Kangyo Rinpoche, Digo Khyentse Rinpoche, His Holiness, to have shown me the path.
So there must be many people coming and asking you how to be happy.
Well, fortunately, not too many, because I don't want to disappoint them. So I did write a little book on happiness, and His Holiness wrote a wonderful book called The Heart of Happiness. So there are basic rules. Don't harm others. Express altruistic love. You progress to well-being. But well-being is not the end of it. Until you achieve complete freedom from those mental poisons and achieve enlightenment, there's only a temporary happiness. So my goal, I'm afraid in this life is a bit late, but I pray that to many lifetimes I may be reborn in the presence of enlightened teachers, and that continue my path without too much obstacles. And I have confidence that thanks to these great teachers, I will progress step by step.
Thank you so much, Matthieu, for speaking to Tibet TV. It's been a pure joy and honor to have you feature as the first guest of the new show.
I'm very honored to be the first guest, and my pleasure to do this conversation.
Thank you so much for watching, and see you in our very next episode of In Conversation with Tibet TV.